All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here. Today, we have the best decks in the current metagame. We're going to be breaking it all down in today's video. Definitely go and register for our tournament this weekend. It's the second tournament of this new season. PMPT number 19, link to register down in the description below. It does start tomorrow, Saturday, noon Eastern time. So we have 7 decks plus a wild card in today's video. And, ranked isn't out yet. We have another week or so until ranked comes out, about 5 days actually. But tons of online tournaments. The meta progression has been going on. So I want to give a big shout out to everybody that's been competing in online tournaments and playing all of these new cards and new deck lists. Anybody that's curious how we put this list together, basically I go through all of the data, all of the results of all of the online competitions, as well as my own personal testing, and that's why I come up with a list of decks for today's video. You can navigate this video by using the timestamps down in the description below. You can jump around. The energy types for all of the decks also will be down in the timestamps. So anyway, guys, let's dive right into it. So by the way, yeah, go register for PMPT number 19. Link down in the description below. Let's get right into it. The first deck we're going to talk about might be a surprise to some people because we've actually talked about this recently. I included this on Wednesday's video because this to me definitely felt like kind of like a fringe deck. When I first saw it, I really thought, wow, this is strong, but it didn't really seem like something that would necessarily catch on, and maybe it won't fully. I'm not saying that, the new Chandelure with Meowth is going to end up being like a top 3 deck in the metagame, but its performances, its win rates, and its play rate over the last few days has been increasing pretty dramatically. This deck is making waves. When I was kind of compiling all of the data to choose decks to highlight in today's video, like this one did stand out to me as something that was completely legitimate as a choice. And again, the whole concept of this deck is you play Meowth and you try to stay in the active as long as possible, draw your supporter cards, play your supporter cards, and hopefully don't get KO'd with the Carefree Steps ability. And then by the end of the game, we go into Chandelure and we want to KO our opponents. That's the entire concept of the deck. We've got a protective poncho in case we're playing Greninja. If not, we can giant cape that Chandelure, go to 160 HP. So it is a pretty bulky Pokemon. We can play Lissy in the deck, which is always really nice. Lissy, a great consistency card. All of our basic Pokemon have 50 HP. And then, yeah, the rest of the deck is just sort of useful supporter cards, which are things that, you kind of take for granted in Pokemon Pocket. There's so many good supporter cards. So a deck like this doesn't mind playing a bunch of them, right? Copycats, Researches, Sabrina Cyrus, Red, Lily. These are all really, really good cards to the overall strategy. This deck list is playing double Litwick, double Chandelure, but 1 Lampent and 1 Rare Candy. And I do think that this is a smart play with Chingling still prominent in the metagame. I think Chingling is a great card. I think that basically at this point, most of all of the best Pokemon in the game are stage 2 Pokemon, and a lot of the best decks play stage 2 Pokemon. So Chingling is always going to be a valuable counterplay and control card. So I think you got to build your deck accordingly. The upside to Meowth is that it really doesn't care about Chingling, and this deck doesn't care really either because we're just going to be drawing a bunch of cards. Somebody did ask me why not play the new Meloetta in place of Meowth, and I think the truth about it is that Meowth is going to be able to stick in the active for quite some time, even though it only has 50 HP. It's got a 50-50 chance to never take damage when it gets attacked, and you draw a card with it. So in this deck particularly, I do think with Lycia and Pokeball, with Researches and Copycats, it's just better to draw a card in this deck particularly than it is to just find Psychic Pokemon. And Meowth has a much more of an ability to stick around for longer, which of course is going to be relevant because we need to go as many turns as possible to play as many supporter cards as possible to utilize Chandelure. So yeah, the win rate for this deck has been very, very surprising to me. It's been a very successful deck list. I don't know if it's really going to break into like the top 10 most played decks of the overall meta, but I'm curious to see its participation rate this weekend because I really would recommend it. Just a very strong deck, not something that I ever saw coming. And that's what's really fun about this meta progression. I think a lot of people were maybe a little disappointed by the performances of some of the new archetypes, things like Kangaskhan, things like Gardevoir, things like Swampert, but there's definitely a lot of new decks and new archetypes that have actually been doing really well. I think they're just things that many people didn't consider outright. So we have the opportunity to talk about them today, and I think that we're going to see a lot of that reflected in the results this weekend. So the first deck is going to be Chandelure. Definitely a fun surprise, 100%. Next up is Giratina and Darkrai. Yeah, I do think that it's about time for us to consider this back into the fold, right? I think that again, Much like Chandelure, I don't know if Giratina Darkrai is going to be a top 3 most played deck this weekend at our tournament, but it certainly will see some play, and it's been very successful. I think that Giratina Darkrai has just been buffed, and I think it's as simple as that. I don't know if really the positioning of this deck, was ever terrible. I do think Giratina Darkrai struggles into some Mega Pokemon matchups, particularly some of those big Mega Pokemon that can live like 2 hits here, which is always a factor, for sure. And Indeedee is a bit of a counterplay to Darkrai, which is why a lot of decks that play Indeedee also might be able to, kind of withstand some of that chip damage that Darkrai can perform. I understand the concepts that Giratina Darkrai struggled with in the last couple of seasons, but the inclusion of Indeedee into the deck list is actually quite relevant. We see this oftentimes with Giratina decks, because Giratina likes to hang out in the active, soak up some hits, right? It's got 150 HP. That's 170 with a giant cape, 190 with cape and starting planes. And starting planes is another card that really buffed this archetype. So a really great deck. Peculiar Plaza giving both Indeedee and Giratina free retreat, so we can play double stadiums in this deck. I think Giratina Darkrai utilizes stadium cards very, very effectively. A hyper consistent deck, one of my favorite decks of all time, one of the best decks of all time. And again, just something that's been buffed, and we could even slot in one of the new Lucky Ice Pops as a broken healing card that everybody seems to absolutely love, right? We all love the RNG healing of Lucky Ice Pop. It is literally called Lucky Ice Pop, so if you're feeling lucky, it's certainly quite the card. I don't know necessarily why they put this card in the game, but they did. In certain decks, definitely do enjoy playing it. When red and Rocky Helmets and the Darkrai pings, I mean, this deck can reach, and that's the reality of it, is that it can deal damage. That's not something that this deck can struggle with. Again, very, very consistent. You have Mars, you got Sabrina in there, so it's just a little bit of everything. I think that some of these new cards really kind of put Giratina Darkrai a bit over the edge, and I think that Giratina has found its way into multiple different meta-relevant decks this season so far, and I think that Giratina itself is a card that greatly appreciates some of the cards that have come into the game recently. So Giratina Darkrai, to me, certainly a valuable choice. And I think that it's been seeing quite a bit of play recently. Like when I checked all of the tournaments throughout the past week, I noticed Giratina Darkrai kind of sprinkled throughout. Sometimes in grand finals, sometimes in top 8, sometimes in top 4. Was never like the most played deck, but it always had a very respectable win rate. And it's just a deck that I feel like we have to command respect to. So I wanted to include it. I wanted to talk about it. I do consider this to be, definitely in like the top 10 decks currently in the metagame. So there we go, Giratina Darkrai. And this is just one example, a very common example of the types of decks people have been playing. I do think there's some room here for adjustments, but I do like this deck list in general. Not something I've personally tested a lot myself. Indeedee seems to have been working well for the deck, but maybe adds a little bit of inconsistency to some degrees for the deck. But I think Peculiar Plaza does kind of fix that as well. A deck list that I really do think is quite strong. Actively. Next up's Giratina it's Suicune Greninja. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here, spend a bunch of time talking about what this deck is. It hasn't changed. It's the exact same thing. And I think it functions kind of the same way it has as well. I think that some of the new decks are definitely changing the landscape of the metagame. But the issue always with Suicune and Greninja is that it doesn't have a lot of really bad volatile matchups, right? Even the losing matchups for Suicune and Greninja are always winnable because this is a deck that is just so consistent, so strong, so flexible that even if you're playing up against an opponent playing a deck that you should have a really bad matchup into, think Decidueye, think Venusaur, think Magnezone, Oricorio, you're going to win sometimes, just because our deck just draws twice the amount of cards our opponent does, and we have Greninja Cyrus, right? So it always has the potential to be very, very difficult to lose. But I think that slowly and surely the metagame is sort of developing around maybe some other decks having, I would say a wider variety of decks have a better matchup distribution into Suicune and Greninja than we've really ever seen. I know Suicune's going to end up winning a lot of tournaments. I contribute that mostly to Hydreigon, just a really, really popular deck that a lot of people play. That's a good deck, but a deck that loses to Suicune and Greninja. So again, if Suicune wins this tournament this weekend, we all know the reason. It's just because of Hydreigon, and that's going to be, how it goes, quite frankly. And I'm not going to discourage anyone from playing any decks. You should play Suicune if you like it. I think that the other thing about Suicune Greninja is that it's a popular choice for a deck amongst the top players of the metagame because it is a little bit more in-depth in your decisions than some of the other decks. So I think it rewards good play, maybe some more than any other decks, right? Pokemon Pocket's definitely got a lot of RNG, even from the competitive sense. So, like the best players will tend to gravitate towards decks that give them, sort of the advantage from a skill gap like perspective. And even if that's a minimal skill gap, I think Suicune Greninja fits that bill. Will this deck go away? I think is what a lot of people are wondering. I don't think this deck's going to just disappear. I think that it's good enough, unless something rises in the metagame, like similar to Hydreigon, that is dominant sort of in general across the board, but has a really good matchup into Suicune and Greninja. That's the only thing I could think of that would replace it, or if we just get a better way to play a very similar deck, which we've actually started to see quite a bit. Altaria Greninja last season is effectively, a very similar deck list. We now have like Mimikyu Giratina with Greninja, so there's a lot of stuff like that. A lot of decks that are similar to Suicune and Greninja. So it would just take a lot to knock off some of these cards from complete meta play. We saw maybe a hint of that with Protective Poncho. So Greninja with Chingling and Poncho and everything, like Greninja's been nerfed a little bit. It's still like the best card in the game. Like there's just, it's hard to justify not playing like Greninja Cyrus in your decks because the plus 20 damage to any Pokemon on the board itself is valuable. And then Cyrus is the #1 win condition in the game. So something would have to change very dramatically for us to stop seeing Greninja. And if Greninja's seeing play, Suicune will see play unless for somehow or some reason a better option arises, which I just don't. I don't expect that to happen necessarily anytime soon, but we'll see, right? So we'll see. So yeah, I mean, in the list today, we've got eight decks to talk about. Suicune's one of them. Come on. All right. And similarly to Suicune is Magnezone or Oricorio, which again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about. And what's funny about this deck list is that it's the exact same. This is the exact same deck that you've come to know and love or hate or be indifferent about, I guess. I don't know. For the last, I don't know how long it's been, probably about 8 months, but it was sort of changed last season. So if we compare it to last season, it is quite literally the exact same deck, and it's going to be successful for the exact same reasons. And I think that's not a bad thing, right? Not every deck has to be completely changed and warped every season. You're going to have a very, very good, respectable, if not one of the best matchups into Suicune and Greninja. I think that's one of the big calling cards for Magnezone, but also a phenomenal matchup into specifically Altaria, which we're going to get to because there is very interesting progressions around Altaria that I cannot wait to talk about with you guys. Do not be surprised if week 2 Magnezone or Oricorio wins. Along with Suicune and Greninja, this is by far the most successful deck maybe Altaria, actually. There's really 3 decks that ever win our tournament series, which is Suicune, Magnezone, Oricorio, and Altaria, because that is the core of the metagame, and they all sort of interact in a bracket, and they're typically the most popular decks to some degree. And I think that it's the same thing. You're going to lose to Hydreigon. You're going to lose to some niche decks in the meta, but you're going to beat some really specific, top level decks, which is, what this deck is. It's a counter meta deck. And I think Oricorio will always exist that way. I wish there was maybe some other ways to play Oricorio, which, there are. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, the Greninja Oricorio stuff is good. And like the Lightning Kangaskhan stuff, is respectable. It's just at the end of the day, if you're playing Oricorio, I think Magnezone is the guy. It is just sort of the home for Oricorio. It's the best way to play it. Everybody understands this deck. You just kind of hate to see it sometimes, or you love to see it if you're a Hydreigon player, I guess. There you go. Again, there's nothing else for me to talk about with this deck. It is what it is. Anyway, next up though, let's talk about Altaria, because we have one version of Altaria in the video today, and that's going to be Gourgiest. So this is one of the, and I believe I'm saying that correctly, like Gourgiest. I honestly, this is the biggest surprise to me. Again, another deck that we talked about on Wednesday, something that had really popped up and had become a little bit successful in online tournaments. And again, the meta changes quickly. And over the last 2 or 3 days since I kind of made that video, it's been popping off. It is becoming the new default way to play Altaria. And again, I think a big reason for that is that it's a really great way to play Altaria, because the core of Altaria has always been, Chingling Lock, sweep Altaria, right? With Mars and Rocky Helmet and stuff like that to kind of get over certain Pokemon with Mega Altaria. That's the core of the deck, and that's what you need to do well into Hydreigon. Altaria always has a winning Hydreigon matchup, and it allows you to have a winning matchup into Suicune most matchups as well, which I think, again, is sort of the big thing about Altaria, is that it beats Suicune. Traditionally, it's beaten Suicune at least a little bit. It's a pretty even matchup, but it does have a good matchup into Suicune, and then it beats Hydreigon. And again, that's the thing with Hydreigon. Or Hydreigon. That's the thing with that deck, is that it loses to Suicune and Altaria. So it's like, what are we, again, what are we doing? I don't know. I'm just here to tell you what's the reality of the situations. But Altaria has had great matchups into really the other top meta decks. However, it's always lost to Oricorio, right? Which is sort of one of those big factors. So this new Gourgeist deck, again, I think is just a really great card to play in Altaria to, again, just be able to beat Oricorios. Like this Gourgeist single energy stage 1 Pokemon, 70 damage, guys, 70 damage. This is a card that's not going to be that useful in some matchups. I mean, it's never a bad card. It's only 1 energy. So if you go Chingling into Gourgeist into Mega Altaria, like it is damage, right? So it's a Pokemon that can deal damage, but it's just a really consistent, easy to plug in Pokemon into Altaria here that allows you to just kind of clear that Oricorio matchup, which is a really, really big deal. It lives a hit from the new Magnezone, which is super significant. Mirror Shot Mag only does 90, right? So people might start to play the new the old Magnezone to 1-hit KO Gourgeist, but that's such a big factor. To be able to come in, KO an Oricorio, and then live a hit from a Magnezone is like potentially game-changing, and I think that is sort of the biggest reason why this sort of Gourgeist deck, or I guess Gourgeist card, has interjected itself into the Altaria deck that we're all pretty familiar with. So I think traditionally Altaria played like Indeedee and then maybe like a Jirachi, just because you had to play Pokemon in the deck. Like that's the concept with Altaria, is that the whole point of it is that you need a full bench, which means you can't just play Altaria and Chingling. You need something else in the deck, and like the, I guess the options for a while were, things like Indeedee for the healing, but that was a bit of a suspect card, because you can always get Greninja Cyrused up and, and then you lose, right? So it's kind of a liability. Mega Altaria's got enough HP anyway. It doesn't really care, right, about like, healing for 20. Indeedee's really good into like other Chinglings if they're playing Darkrai or like Rocky Helmet, but that's not the most, we're also playing a Rocky Helmet in the deck. Trading area is a really big deal for this deck as well. Because I think that now we don't have to necessarily play Rocky Helmet, although 1-1 does make sense to me. And you don't have to play things like Red, specifically for that Suicune KO. So now Training Arena, or Training Area rather, this new stadium, it brings the damage threshold from Altaria to 130 to 140. Which is an exponentially better number. For a lot of reasons, 140, that's Darkrai's HP, that's Suicune's HP. There's so many more Pokemon that you're able to KO at 140 than you are at 130. And I think that was a part of the design choice with Altaria. They were like, are we really going to let this thing 1-hit KO at like everything in the meta? So you were forced for a while to play things like Red or Rocky Helmet. And now I think Trading Area is just a better card. It's not only going to buff that damage for Mega Altaria, but it's also going to bring Gourgeist up to 80 damage, which I guess might be relevant into stuff. I don't know. But I mean, it is a buff regardless, right? And not a lot of decks are playing stadiums. They are. But again, like 1 Trading Arena, 1 Rocky Helmet, and we can kind of not play Red in the deck. You can play 1 Lycia, 1 Copycat, Sabrina, Cyrus. This is just a really good deck, and something that I'm really excited about. Not a progression to a previous meta deck that I was really expecting, but one that I think is very welcome. One I think that might just be enough to bring Altaria like right over the top. And if you got to understand it from like a positioning perspective in the metagame, like the hierarchy of decks. So Altaria's been, again, one of the top 3 Pokemon really since it came out, but it's never been the far and away best deck. Even today, it might not be the most played deck, and tomorrow it might not be the most played deck. That might still be Hydreigon, but you got to keep in mind, if Altaria really, like if this inclusion to Gourgeist into Altaria brings it really over the edge, and it becomes, and by the way, I did put Altaria S tier on the tier list, and there's a reason for that, because I do think that regardless of kind of this new tech with Gourgeist, like it was just the most well-positioned deck, and that's why I also put Magnezone in the S tier on Tuesday's tier list. If you watched, it's just because, hey, a lot of Hydreigon, Suicune's gonna rise because it won last weekend. Like, what is the answer? It's Altaria Chingling. Like, that is the purpose of it in the metagame. So that's why those 2 decks went into the S tier. Quite frankly, some people disagreed, but you know what? I've been doing this for a long time, and trust me, I kind of know what I'm talking about to some degree. So it's Altaria Chingling. The Oricorio matchup's been buffed. If Altaria really becomes the #1 top deck, then the metagame can rebalance. It can reshift, and then a new deck that might be really good into Altaria can sort of rise back up. Hopefully we have a deck like that. We don't know yet, but it's certainly something that I think we should be keeping our eye on. So out of all of the decks in this video, I think that this might be the most significant out of any of the deck lists. So there you go. That's my spiel about Altaria, because it is a massive deal. I mean, I know it seems like a small thing, but if Altaria all of a sudden can now just be good into Oricorio, it's like, why would we not play it? You know what I mean? It's a big deal. Like, that's a really big deal for meta balance and the hierarchy of the metagame. We'll see how it goes. But the last couple of tournaments, it's been dominant, so keep in mind. Next up is Hydreigon. Yeah, it's here. It's on the video. It's here. Here you go. I don't think people really want to hear me talk about it anymore. You know, I just, again, for anybody that's possibly new to my channel, or if you've never watched my video over the last 3 months or so, if you don't know what's going on, Hydreigon actually was very well positioned at the beginning of the season. It just really strong into a lot of the new decks that people decided to play from Fantastical Parade. Was very dominant, was by far the most played deck going into last weekend, and unfortunately, it still has a bad Suicune matchup. So, you know, it completely stomped like a bunch of decks. Was by far the most successful deck overall of last weekend, and then lost to Suicune in brackets. So we had double Suicunes in the finals, and that was the story. I still think Hydreigon will see a lot of play. It is the default deck. It definitely is. The simplicity of the deck, the high roll kind of RNG nature, like autopilot kind of functionality of Hydreigon, I think makes it attractive to a wide audience of players. You know, if you're cooking dinner, if you're watching the Super Bowl or whatever, you can still play Hydreigon. Like, you know, you're kind of just on autopilot a little bit. Kind of like the new Charizard in a way. Back in the day, like the Stoke Charizard was sort of the same concept. It was like, do I get it? Do I draw it? You know, do I have it? No? All right, well, maybe next time, right? That's kind of how this deck goes. So the default deck, for now, I think it is still the most common deck of the metagame, much to my chagrin, quite frankly. But you know, again, I'm not here to disrespect it. There's a reason why I keep putting it in my videos. There is a reason why I keep talking about it, is because it's very strong and it has to be talked about. So again, really good into a lot of the new decks, which are gonna drop and play anyway. And very good matchup into anything Oricorio, because we're not playing any EX Pokemon, right? Well, we are. We're playing Mega Absol, but you know, it's got a good matchup into Magnezone Oricorio, which is always really relevant. In terms of the deck list specifically, I guess I should mention this is the poison variant with double Barbs and Nihilego. People have cut Indeedee ever since Lucky Ice Pop came into the game. Probably one of the more interesting meta progressions. You know, when I saw Lucky Ice Pop, I was like, this card's broken. But I didn't really expect it to just replace Indeedee in a lot of decks. And some decks are playing both, right? It's not complete. Indeedee's not gone, that's for sure. A lot of the decks in the video are playing Indeedee. But I do think Lucky Ice Pop, in a lot of ways, kind of solves that issue with Hydreigon. Like, when you use Groar in Unison, you take 30 damage. So, like, you have a pretty good shot of just playing Ice Pop and then not having to worry about it. And you don't have the liability of Indeedee on the bench. So for this deck specifically, I think it makes a lot more sense. Nihilego, Poison Barb just kind of makes this, the reason why I think in this deck you'd rather play Nihilego and Poison Barb than something like a Rocky Helmet is because it's a dark deck. So you can kind of just get away with playing Nihilego. You know, it's like a weird advantage that dark type decks have. And I don't think this deck's any different. So anyway, I'm done talking about it. Play Hydreigon if you want. I can't stop you. It's just, you know, you're going to lose this weekend. You know, like that's, you know, it's been proven. Fun fact, you know, we've done 18 PMPT tournaments, 19 including the Invitational, and Hydreigon has won one tournament. It's won one tournament back in, it was PMPT number 9. It won, and that's the first and only one it's ever won, and I don't know if it'll win again. I could be wrong. If Hydreigon wins this weekend, I might throw my computer through a wall. I really might. But you know, at the end of the day, what are you gonna do? You know, what are you gonna do? Next up is Mimikyu. We made a video about this deck, or a very similar list, yesterday, because I really think Mimikyu is kind of the most underrated thing in the game. Some of the comments were hilarious, where I was like, oh, it's like a new meta strategy. It's like a new thing in the meta game that is really significant. And people are like, ah, it's a Greninja deck. You know, I don't care. Which again, you know, fair play. I get it. You know, people are sick of Greninja, but again, if you're trying to win games, if you're trying to be a competitive Pokemon Pocket participant, you probably want to play Greninja in some of your decks. And I think that the Mimikyu card it actually pairs extremely well with Greninja for a couple of reasons. Not only is Mimikyu a broken Pokemon, but the very nature of it delays the game, right? Like the disguise ability means that, yes, you're basically taking an additional turn to deal the same amount of damage that some other Pokemon could do. And while that doesn't seem that great, what it's doing is extending the amount of turns that we have to draw cards, which is always a phenomenal thing. It basically functions similarly to how Suicune functions, in the sense of like, hey, like Suicune's just drawing double cards, but Mimikyu's just taking double the turns, which, you know, again, equates to you having the Greninja Cyrus sort of board condition, win condition eventually. And I think that's just a big factor here. Giratina just makes sense in the deck. It's a valuable card. This is from Numatanale, I believe. He actually just got first place, I think, at a tournament like today or yesterday. So again, I didn't make this video yesterday for no reason. I didn't highlight this deck for no reason. It is something that I believe in, been very successful. So far, Numatanale has been kind of like the main person playing this deck, but a couple of other people have also been picking this deck up and been successful. It's really just Mimikyu Greninja is like the core package, and he's swapping one rare candy for one Frogadier. Again, he did comment on on yesterday's video saying that this was a deck list I didn't love playing against Chingling, and that is true, right? Chingling's not only going to break Mimikyu's disguise, it's going to stop you from rare candying into Greninja, so that is certainly an issue for the matchups, which is why I believe he's playing one rare candy and one Frogadier to help kind of combat the Chingling problem. Either way, this deck's broken. This is a really, really good deck. And I think a lot of people are just like, okay, another psychic type, broken attacking Pokemon in Mimikyu, but that's what we got, that's what it is. It's just a really good card. It's a really good card. People ask me as well, like, why no Peculiar Plaza? Well, I think the reality of it is that this isn't a deck that really cares to like retreat often, right? Now, as long as you're leading Mimikyu or Giratina, you don't really care. You can kind of just play the game with the boards, with the board state that you have. I don't think Peculiar Plaza is really that necessary, and especially since it's not allowing you to retreat from Froakie anyway, then half the time it's just not really that useful. The times that we would want to retreat is with Froakies in the active, which we did 5 times in a row in the video yesterday. So I think that's the reason, quite frankly. Rocky Helmet, again, does seem a bit counterproductive at first glance with Mimikyu because it does not proc on the first time Mimikyu takes an attack with the Disguise ability active because you don't take any damage. So Rocky Helmet doesn't go into a play, but it's still the most valuable, the most effective damage modification card in the game. So you're going to play it, just like most decks play it, quite frankly. So yeah, Greninja, Rocky Helmet, Mimikyu, the damage adds up, just Greninja, Mimikyu is 90 damage every turn. So like you're basically, and that's the whole thing. Like the more turns you're delaying, the better Greninja is because you can just have another turn, draw Cyrus, and you get an additional Water Shuriken ping. So like Mimikyu just does pair extremely well with Greninja, which I know a lot of decks do, a lot of cards do pair well with Greninja, but Mimikyu specifically, I think, more than a lot of other things in the game, right? Just the nature of how the card works, and that's my observation. Again, you can play the deck if you want to, you can laugh at it, you can say, oh, it's Greninja, you suck. Why, I get it, whatever, but it's a good deck, so I wanted to highlight it, and it's a new deck. Excuse me. Almost just like, I just had a frog in my throat. It's like a new deck, it's a new strategy. I get it. All right, anyway, this is gonna be the weekly wild card. we made it to the end here. Yeah, the weekly wild card is typically what I reserve for, it doesn't necessarily have to be a new deck or a crazy deck or an off meta deck. It's just something that I think is on the cusp, right? It's something that I consider to be, potentially really important to the metagame, but maybe not at all, right? It's, you just don't really know which way it's going to go, which is kind of the purpose of the wild card this week. In the weekly wild card, I'm delaying it enough. All right, here we go. It's Buzzwole, guys. It's Buzzwole. I know you guys all know Buzzwole, but I think it is like the perfect wild card right now in the active metagame. Something that has really interesting matchups across the board. I think this deck has been buffed predominantly by Starting Plains, quite frankly. I think Starting Plains makes this deck a whole lot better, and I think that it's actually just a really quality deck. It always has been. Struggles into Suicune and Greninja. That's to me why it's the wild card. At the end of the day, like this is not the deck you want to play into Suicune and Greninja, but it actually does pretty well into a lot of different things in the meta, which is always pretty relevant. A very unique deck. Doesn't deal a ton of damage, but is very sustain heavy. And it is an incredibly consistent tempo deck, and it's got a lot of options, just like it always did. You got the bench damage Cyrus win condition with Pheromosa. You have the aggressive 1-hit KO potential with Kartana into Dark Weak basic Pokemon, like a Dino. It can also just kind of clear through baby Pokemon, so Kartana, very aggressive card. And again, Leaf Cape plus Starting Plains is going to give these Pokemon way more HP than you think. That's plus 50. Plus 50 HP. That brings Buzzwole up to 190 HP. Like, what are we talking about? And I think that with Erica in the deck and you got Lusamine to kind of chain into Buzzwole, it's just a very good deck. It's going to have great matchups and some bad matchups. And I think that to me is why it's like the number one like wild card deck in the meta right now. I think Tilly commented on my video a few days ago. He was like, Buzzwole like for the win, like tier 0. I think Buzzwole is awesome. One of my favorite decks of all time. If Suicune really does get kind of kept down a little bit, which I don't suspect it to be completely irrelevant, Buzzwole definitely is going to have a place in the metagame. So that's it's the other side of that coin, quite frankly. But I really do like Buzzwole, and I think it's a great Pokemon. The only downside to it is that 120 damage, right? Like 120 these days, like really doesn't feel as good as it should. Like even back in the day, like there's so many things you're not KOing at 120, but there is a lot of dark Pokemon. So if you go up against the Darkrai, you're feeling pretty good. Giratina Darkrai, Dark Kangaskhan, Daycare, whatever else plays Darkrai, you're feeling pretty good about it. And then again, like the Pheromosa damage on the bench, like it does stack up, even like Kartana on the active. So if you can live a hit and get 2 attacks off with Buzzwole, then, you know, that 120 is really 240. And I think that's kind of where Buzzwole fits in. You know, you're going to live. You're going to live a hit, which is always really nice. Yeah, nothing's really stopping the whole Greninja stuff, right? That's the thing here. We are playing 1 Mars in the deck, but, you know, like we're not playing Chingling and whatnot. So you can't just get kind of Greninja bombed pretty easily if you're playing Buzzwole, which, you know, is definitely part of the meta. But I love Buzzwole and I would recommend it. That's why it's in the video today, right? Why would I talk about it, I guess, if I didn't recommend it? But it is the wild card, so proceed with caution, I suppose. That's the video today. About 30 minutes. I think we did pretty good. And I'm actually feeling really great about the metagame, and I'm feeling really great about this list. You know, some new decks, some old decks that have been, you know, edited and have been sort of changed a little bit. I think the meta is actually being shifted a little bit more and changed more than people might give it credit for. And again, people are always going to look at things at face value. They're going to be like, oh, so much Greninja, the meta sucks. It's still the same thing. Nothing changed. I get it. Like, that one aspect of it is still going to be popular. I think people just expected to, like, you know, poof, like Greninja's gone. Like, it's not going to work that way. But a lot of the other aspects of the metagame have changed, right? And I think you either appreciate that or you don't. You know, I can't convince you otherwise. So there you go. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. We're on the road to 50,000 subscribers. Don't forget to register for PMPT number 19 tomorrow, noontime. Gonna be a ton of fun. It really is. It's gonna be an absolute blast. Come and play. I definitely would recommend it. And there you go, guys. There's the video. Let's wrap it up here. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah, that's it. I don't have anything else. All right. Bye.